I need you to understand something before you hear this story. I'm not the kind of person who panics easily. I've flown more than 60 times in my life. Airports are as familiar to me as my own kitchen. The long lines, the delays, the noise, the smell of stale coffee and jet fuel, none of it has ever bothered me. Until that night. A Tuesday night in the middle of winter at O'Hare Airport. My flight was at 11:45 p.m. As usual, I got there early. Around 9, I had already cleared security, found gate G17, and settled in. The airport felt unusually quiet, with only a few exhausted travelers and those who couldn't sleep lingering around. Around 10 in, an announcement came on. The flight was delayed by 2 hours due to a technical issue. No one was happy, but for me, it was nothing unusual. I stayed seated, put on a podcast, and waited. That's when I saw him, a man in his 50s, wearing a gray jacket, dark pants, with a small carry-on placed at his feet. Nothing about him stood out, except his eyes. He wasn't on his phone, he wasn't reading, he wasn't doing anything at all, just staring at the gate desk with a level of focus that made me uncomfortable. It wasn't the frustration of a delayed passenger, it was something else, something calculated. I looked away, telling myself I was overthinking it, but by 11, the gate area was almost empty. Maybe a dozen people left. And he was still there, not moving, not eating, not using the restroom. Occasionally, he would slowly scan the area, like he was taking inventory of everything. Once, his eyes lingered on me just a second too long. That's when I started to feel something was wrong. At 11:30, the gate agent announced boarding would begin at 1:15 a.m., then stepped away for a moment. The silence in the terminal became so deep I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. That's when he stood up. He picked up his bag and walked toward the desk, but didn't stop to ask anything. Instead, he leaned slightly behind the counter and quickly placed something into the small shelf underneath. Then he walked back to his seat like nothing had happened. My heart started pounding. Every logical explanation rushed into my mind. Maybe he dropped something. Maybe he was returning something. But the way he moved, it was too precise, too deliberate, and he waited for the exact moment when no one was there. I stood up, pretending to stretch my legs, and quietly called airport security. I told them everything. There was a pause on the line. Then the voice changed completely. Stay calm. Do not approach. We're on our way. 11 minutes later, 3 people arrived, 2 TSA officers and 1 police officer. They walked calmly, without drawing attention. They went straight to the desk. The agent pointed to the shelf. One of them reached down and pulled out a small black bag. Everything after that happened fast. Radios crackled. More personnel showed up. Tension spread across the entire area. The man in the gray jacket stood up before they even approached him, as if he already knew. They escorted him away, 1 officer on each side holding his arms. As he passed by, he turned back and looked directly at me. I never found out what was inside that bag. No news. No explanation. Just a brief report about a security incident in Terminal G. But there's one thing I know for sure. He had been sitting there for hours, watching, waiting, calculating every moment. And if the flight hadn't been delayed, if I hadn't happened to notice, I might have never seen it at all. Since that night, I still fly. But I don't zone out anymore. Because most people in an airport are harmless. But a few are counting on you to look away. There are moments when you just know something isn't right, even if you can't explain why. That night was one of those moments. I was at a small regional airport in Ohio, the last flight of the day, gate C7. It was close to 11 p.m. The space was nearly empty. A few passengers were stretched out across chairs, jackets covering their faces. All the shops were closed. The lights were dimmed just enough to make everything feel slightly off. It was the kind of silence where you could hear the smallest sounds. I sat down near the gate, plugged in my phone, and that's when I saw him. A middle-aged man in a gray jacket, sitting about a dozen meters away from me. A small carry-on bag rested at his feet. Nothing unusual, until I looked up a second time. He was staring at me. Not the kind of accidental eye contact. Not a distant, unfocused glance. It was direct, intentional, like he was waiting for something. I looked away, telling myself I was just tired and overthinking. But a few minutes later, when I glanced up again, he was still looking. A sense of unease started creeping in. I shifted in my seat, turning slightly away, trying to reassure myself he's probably just looking in this direction. Then the announcement came. The flight was delayed by 45 minutes. A few people sighed. Some stood up and walked off. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when I looked back, he was gone. The seat was empty. The bag was gone too. I didn't understand why, but I felt a wave of relief. And immediately after, I felt stupid for reacting that way. I stood up and walked toward the vending machines at the end of the hallway. I stayed there for a moment, just breathing, trying to calm myself down. And then I heard it. Not footsteps, not some dramatic horror movie sound, a voice, low, calm, speaking on the phone, coming from the small hallway leading to the family restroom. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but in that silence, the words carried clearly. She moved to C7, blue jacket, traveling alone. I froze. Blue jacket, gate, C7. Traveling alone. That was me, my entire body locked up. My brain took a few seconds to process what I had just heard. Then something instinctive kicked in. I didn't run. I walked fast, back toward the gate area, toward the lights, toward the people. I chose a new seat, close to the gate agent's desk, right next to an older couple. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled out my phone, pretending to dial someone, just to look like I had someone waiting for me, like I wasn't alone. I scanned the area, and he was back, sitting in a different spot farther away. This time, he was looking at his phone. Not at me anymore, but something about it made my skin crawl. He hadn't been near that hallway before he disappeared. So, who was on that phone? There was someone else, or he wasn't alone. I stood up and walked straight to the counter. I told the agent everything, word for word, what I heard, what I saw. I thought they would brush me off, but they didn't. The woman immediately picked up her phone. About 4 minutes later, 2 security officers walked in. They approached the man in the gray jacket, spoke to him, checked his ID. One of them stepped back and spoke quietly into a radio. I could see the shift in his posture, that exact moment when someone realizes things are no longer going according to plan. They escorted him out of the area, no shouting, no scene, but enough for me to know something wasn't right. After that, they took my statement, brief, no further explanation. I boarded my flight. I never found out what the truth was. Was I a target or just a terrifying coincidence? Who was on the other end of that call? I don't have answers. But I know this, someone described me perfectly. My position, what I was wearing, the fact that I was alone in a nearly empty airport at midnight. And I had never spoken to them. Since that night, I don't sit in airports the same way anymore. I don't wear both earbuds. I don't bury my head in my phone for too long. I watch. Because most people around you really are harmless, but it only takes one person who isn't, and that's more than enough. I used to think that the scariest things only happened in obviously dangerous situations, dark alleys, empty places, situations where you know for a fact that you're in trouble. But I was wrong. Sometimes the thing that chills you to the core happens in the place where you feel the safest, an airport. That night, I was at Denver International Airport. It was close to 11 p.m. I had just finished 3 straight weeks of work travel, and the only thing I wanted at that moment was to go home, take a hot shower, and get a full night's sleep. I had even thought about canceling the flight and rescheduling for the next morning. But I got on the plane anyway. It's a decision that, even now, I'm not sure I should have made. The airport felt strangely quiet, not completely empty, but just quiet enough that every sound seemed sharper than usual. And vice versa. A few dozen people were scattered around the gate area. Everyone was doing what travelers do. Heads down, phones out, earbuds in, trying to pass the time. I bought a coffee, found a seat near the window, and stared out at the plane sitting on the tarmac. And then, I saw him. A middle-aged man, gray jacket, dark pants, a black duffel bag at his feet. Nothing particularly unusual. But there was something about him that caught my attention. He wasn't doing anything. No phone, no book, no sleep. Just sitting there, completely still. Like he was thinking about something very specific. At first, I didn't pay much attention. But after I finished a quick call with my wife, I looked back. He was staring at me. Not the kind of accidental glance, but the kind of look from someone who had already made a decision. He didn't look away when I met his eyes. No reflex, no embarrassment. He held that gaze for a few seconds longer than normal, then slowly turned away. A cold feeling ran down my spine. I told myself I was imagining things. But I moved seats anyway. I shifted about 10 meters away, closer to the gate desk where there were staff and better lighting. An old habit. When something feels off, move somewhere safer, but keep it in sight. He didn't react, didn't look over, just sat there. 40 minutes passed. Boarding was called. I stood up and got in line. While waiting, I took one last glance at the seating area. He was still there, not standing, no sign of boarding. I felt relief wash over me. I thought it was over. I was wrong. I boarded the plane, took my window seat in row 24. Passengers settled in. The cabin filled up. The sound of bags being shoved into overhead bins, doors closing, the familiar recycled air. Then someone stopped at the row in front of me. A bag was pushed into the overhead compartment. The person took the aisle seat. I looked up. It was him. Same face, same gray jacket, same black bag. My entire body went cold. He hadn't stood up when boarding began. There was no logical reason for him to be on that plane. But he was there. Just one row ahead of me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he boarded late, maybe I didn't notice. But then he turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see part of his face. And he said, very quietly, "Long night, huh?" Not to the person next to him. The seat beside him was empty. He was talking to me. I didn't respond. I turned to the window, trying to steady my breathing. I'm a grown man. I've been through real danger before. But in that moment, my hands were shaking. The plane took off. Lights dimmed. Most people fell asleep. I didn't. About an hour in, he stood up and walked toward the restroom. As he passed my row, he paused, just for a second, then looked down at me and said, "You moved your seat back there." Not a question, a statement. He knew. He knew exactly where I had been sitting before, and he knew I had moved. I said nothing. I couldn't say anything. He kept walking. When the plane landed, I was the first one out of my seat. I went straight to a security officer and told him everything. They listened, called for backup, took my statement, but I never found out what happened after that. There's just one thing that I still can't explain. When I called my wife at the gate, I had stepped a few meters away from my original seat. I kept my voice low. I never mentioned my location. I never said where I was sitting. There is no way a stranger could have known I moved, unless he had been watching me long before I ever noticed him, long before I even became aware of his presence. Since that night, I still have to fly for work, but I'm not the same anymore. I don't wear both earbuds. I don't bury my head in my phone for too long. I pay attention to the people who aren't looking at their phones, because the biggest mistake I made that night was assuming that everyone around me was just a stranger. Sometimes they've been watching you for a long time already.